King had a dream. I am the dream. Dr. King had a dream. I am the dream. Dr. King had a dream. I am the dream. Dr. King had a dream. I am the dream. Dr. King had a dream. I am the dream.
Hi everyone, I'm Corey, a Chicago-based visual artist, and graphic designer and activist.
Yeah, I'm Joseph Blake. I'm a local photographer and documenter, and yeah.
My name is Sochi, and I use she, her, and I'm a local painter and printmaker. I just like to use my art as my voice.
I'm Tiana. I'm an activist and organizer. I'm also a student, and I'm just learning every single day.
My name is Barack. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an Egyptian American, Portland-based and raised activist, abolitionist, and community organizer. And I'm the program director for the Peacekeeper Society based on Yakima Reservation.
Hey everyone, I'm Jacinda and I use they, them pronouns. I am a relational organizer currently based in Portland, Oregon, supporting Don't Shoot Mutual Aid programs and just connecting people through their stories and ensuring that everybody feels empowered to use their voice. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, hi, my name is Ariana. I am Miss Black Teen Oregon, I was on my phone. I'm Miss Black Teen Oregon International Ambassador, and I'm also a youth activist in Portland. I do work with the youth, and I've been out on the front line since day one, and I'm so excited to be here and talk today.
Yes, hi, I'm Lo. I'm one of the interpreters for today. I'm working here with all the folks at Don't Shoot Portland through Fingers Crossed Interpreting. And just so you know, our other interpreter is in the waiting room, it sounds like.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Samuel Myers. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a visual artist, musician, and work within the community in Portland, doing a lot of advocacy work with artists for infrastructure, ran by artists for artists. And I'm happy to be here today as part of this conversation with everybody.
I'm the Legal Observer Coordinator here in Portland. We do the green hats at protests. Right now, our student chapter and our local chapter are working on a few different things, like getting ready for the summer and legal observing and doing some Know Your Rights work.
No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice!
I'm just going to run through the same Know Your Rights training we use for our legal observers. It's mostly focused on what to do at protests, but it has some other stuff in there too. While the Constitution is hardly a perfect document, it's where most of our rights come from. We're all familiar with the right to speech and assembly and stuff like that. The Fourth Amendment is where most of our privacy rights are housed. And most importantly, in most cases, is our right to remain silent. So I'm just going to cover pretty much those three. First of all, our right to be out there in the streets to protest and even to speak our minds in other forums comes from the First Amendment. And while it's unlimited, it does give us a wide, basically gives us a lot of freedom in terms of content. Your First Amendment rights can be limited based on venue. So for example, if you're out in the streets, take note of whether you're demonstrating on a public street or in a private venue or a semi-private venue. So if you're, inside of a government office building, you're probably going to be more easily subject to arrest. If you're on private property, especially like if you're protesting at a mall or you're protesting at the Nordstroms downtown, it's easier for them as soon as you enter a private space to have you trespassed or arrested because your First Amendment rights pretty much stop at private property. Now they can't regulate content. So in a traditional public forum, you can pretty much say what you want as long as you're not specifically inciting violence, hate speech, fighting words, true threats, or defamation. We tell all our legal observers, make sure that you know who's listening and recording you. But in terms of what the police can do, they can't do a whole lot about content. It's really about where you are. So someone on the sidewalk or at a public park is very safe from a dispersal order in a legal sense compared to someone who's, blocking the door of a building or protesting in a private space. Now, okay, so the big meatiest part of our rights are the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. You have a right to refuse searches, especially when they're unreasonable and when there's no warrant. But there are many exceptions to this, and you should always express that right verbally and not by resistance. At the point where they're searching your stuff or your person, it's best to just go along with it physically and keep saying, I do not consent to this search. Every time they ask you, and they'll ask you multiple times, every time they want to open up a new pocket in your backpack or go through a new part of your car, they might keep asking you, just keep saying, I don't consent. At that point, there's not much you can do physically, but you can challenge it later and your lawyer will thank you. Also, I just realized there's an ASL interpreter. Thank you so much for interpreting me. All right, so the two exceptions to this warrant requirement are that if you give consent, essentially, the cops will generally ask to enter your home or your office, and they might act like they have something important, but you don't have to even answer the door. If the cops come to your door on something, it's often best not to answer and call a lawyer at that point. It's unlikely they'll be able to force their way in or they'll have a warrant at that point. If they have a warrant, they might search the areas on the warrant, but you have a right to look at the warrant before they enter your property and a right to look at the warrant before they arrest you. That might not always work out practically, so don't resist. But if the cops go outside the scope of their warrant, you'll have a right to challenge it in court. Often, a lot of cases are based on this evidence that's taken very quickly and without process, like a lot of the drug cases we see are just people who are stopped and searched illegally. As long as you don't consent to it, you always have a chance to challenge that evidence in court. There are certain specific exceptions to the warrant requirement where you can be searched. If there are exigent circumstances, for example, if the cop is pursuing someone who he believes committed a crime, you might be able to go through your house, for example, like a Ferris Bueller situation where someone runs through your house, the cop can follow. There's a community caretaking exception. So if the cops are doing a welfare check on someone who's not responding, they might have a right to look in windows or even open doors. In your car, you have very few rights. Remember this one, the cops can look anywhere a passenger is located, and in some cases in the trunk. They can also look in people's backpacks in your car. So you and your friends, if you're driving around, don't have the same kind of protections while you're in an automobile. The standard there would be reasonable suspicion, meaning they only have to suspect that you have something illegal and they can search your car more easily. That's part of having a driver's license, unfortunately. When someone is arrested, the cops may do a protective sweep of the area for weapons. However, this should only cover about an arm's length from the person. They shouldn't be able to search everyone in the crowd or everyone in the area. It should be just that person and their property. And there's a plain view doctrine. Essentially, if the cops can see something in plain view, like they look in the window of your house, your car, and they see an illegal weapon or what looks to be drug paraphernalia, they might be able to enter your house and seize that specifically. Anything else they find is fair game. There was one more exception. Oh, no, there was not. Thank you. Now, the final right I'm going to talk about is your Sixth Amendment right, or your Fifth Amendment right to not be a witness against yourself. Essentially, most convictions come from people confessing or from statements that people make. You never have to talk to the police. The only time you ever have to answer any questions without facing consequences is literally in a courtroom when a judge compels you to with an order. When you're being interrogated in front of a grand jury, if you're asked to be a witness for someone else, you do not have to speak to the police, and you should not. When cops come and talk to you, they're never just talking to you, it's always fishing. If they don't know what you've done wrong or what they think you've done wrong, they're going to ask you questions that will lead you to admit something. Intimidation and interrogations is their biggest tool in many cases. Don't agree to interviews with cops. And if you're pretty much forced to, like if they say, you know, come in or we'll arrest you, get a lawyer immediately. Go down there with your attorney. Find a pro bono service if you have to. But don't talk to the police. And if you receive a subpoena, which is a court order to appear in court or give evidence in someone else's trial, also contact a lawyer. You know, you're helping put someone else in prison, usually for something they shouldn't be doing, especially if it's at a protest. You'll probably be testifying against one of your comrades. Essentially, you have a right to remain silent, but you have to invoke it in a certain way. When you invoke your right to remain silent, you actually have to stay silent. What we see at protests a lot is that people will answer the police questions, try and talk their way out of it. Once the police are arresting you, it's probably not going to happen, especially at our protests. They're just collecting evidence at that point. Every time they ask you a question, say, I wish to remain silent and I want a lawyer. Just those two things. You can say don't consent to a search or they try and search you, but for the most part, keep in your back pocket, I don't consent to, I have a right to remain silent and I want an attorney. Once you say this, they can't question you for about an hour. They can come back later after waiting a few minutes to a couple hours and ask you again. You must invoke your right to silence again. If you invoke your right to silence, then say anything at all to them, you have then surrendered that right. They can ask you questions again. So you can't only say what you want. It's best to just say nothing until you have seen a lawyer. Now, when you talk to cops, you don't have a right to lie to them, but they can lie to you, and they will, to get you to confess to things. You should always keep your hands visible, like if they're coming up and talking to you, and don't go anywhere with them unless you are under arrest. You can always ask if you're free to leave, or you can just start walking away and only stop when you're required to. The police will tell you, like if you start walking away and you're not allowed to go, the police will tell you. You know, stay in well-lit areas and where witnesses are present at an action. Don't wander too far from the crowd necessarily when there are police milling about. If they corner you, it's a lot more intimidating. And, you know, assume the cop is recording you, but the recording won't be available to you. So have, you know, yourself or your friends around to record you. You might be able to record yourself or record the cop yourself, but you might have to, you know, put your hands up, or, you know, your phone might be taken from you. So it's important when you're out and about doing this kind of stuff to have your friends there to film you. And when you assert your rights, you should do so in a moment, but be polite and firm. Don't try and resist anything unless you know you're willing to get hurt for it. At that point, you know, you're better off using legal recourse later. The last thing I'm going to cover is the 3 types of detention, or 3 types of police contact. There's conversation, detention, and arrest. A conversation is something you probably shouldn't have with the police. You know, even taunting them or something. Like we always just say, don't talk to them at all and don't engage. They will come into protest, try and act like your friend. And they're allowed to do this. They can always come and talk to you. It doesn't mean you can't leave. It doesn't mean you have to answer any questions. They will come up and try and pretend they're friendly. And, you know, generally try and get whatever information or provoke whatever response they can. If it's a level 1 situation and you're not there on the protest line, you can just leave. And once you can just leave, you can even ask. Once you know you can just leave, just leave. That's the safest way to deal with it. The second level of police contact is detention. If the cop thinks you've committed a crime or are about to commit a crime, they will detain you and they will tell you you're not free to leave. Like they will say, please remain here, stuff like that. At that point, you cannot just leave without being tackled or arrested. But you don't have to consent to a search, and you should absolutely not. They will try and search you. They might do a Terry stop, which is like a basic weapons pat down. They're allowed to do that. It's very invasive. It's very rude. They shouldn't go in your pockets, but they might. So yeah, that's the last exception I was trying to think of earlier, is a Terry stop, where the police are looking for weapons in a crowd of people, and so they can pat them down, and anything that looks like a weapon they can examine. So if you have like an umbrella under your coat, they might be able to pull that out. At that point, you should still say don't consent and just keep it in your back pocket in case they try and do something with that. when the police do come talk to you during a detention, you still invoke your right to silence. And that's the point where you ask for a lawyer. In a conversation, you don't really need a lawyer. You just don't talk to them. At this point, they're going to ask you questions. Ask the lawyer here. They'll either let you go or they'll perform the arrest, but you won't be having this conversation, potentially off record, potentially incriminating for yourself. At this point, when we need to start together officers' names and badge numbers, it might be hard, but if you have the name and badge number, filing a complaint, disputing some charges, disputing anything like resisting arrest becomes a lot easier. You'll also find this information on incident reports, but they might not all be there. And also, when you're detained by the police or arrested, write down what happened as soon as you get out of the situation. Not once you're in prison or once you're in jail, but once you're on the street again, once you're, you've been bailed out, start writing down and recording what happened to yourself. The last level and the worst type of police contact is, arrest. Ask for an attorney immediately when you're arrested and keep demanding that. They don't have to give you one immediately. They do have to give you one before that you get questioned. So keep asking for that attorney. They must allow you to talk to an attorney. They must give you a call. The police will listen to that call. Your calls from jail are never private. The police are always listening and always recording those. There are also people going to be in a holding cell. There are going to be people also incarcerated with you that are rats, basically. They are police informants. So don't talk to fellow arrestees about their circumstances so they don't incriminate themselves. Don't talk about your circumstances. Talk about the weather and wait for your attorney. Finally, you have to have, if you're arrested, you're supposed to get adequate medical care. You might not get it. Inform the jail staff, not the guards if possible, and do so in writing and keep, records. Know what medicines you need, know how to contact people on the outside who can bring them to you. And if there's anything that goes wrong, like an abuse or lacking medical care, begin the grievance process immediately. So, just a short summary, your main rights at protests are your First Amendment right just to be there, your Fourth Amendment right to refuse a search, and your Fifth Amendment right to avoid self-incrimination. The only things you should say to a cop are, I do not consent to a search. I have a right to remain silent, and I want a lawyer.
Is there anything different? Because I live in California. So is there any difference in what he just told us, or is this all just standard?
This stuff is pretty standard. There's not many specific rights for Oregon that are relevant to bring up here.
Would these also apply for undocumented folks in our country, and what can they do when they're stopped by the police if it's different under those laws?
Yes and no. These same rights are constitutional and should apply to everyone. For undocumented people, they're facing basically all of the legal stuff that we face, plus an immigration system. Essentially, for undocumented people, the police in Oregon probably aren't going to ask about their status, but if they're arrested, they'll probably be referred to ICE. So all the stuff after the arrest is different. They end up in a much more dire situation.
Okay, and my last question is just bouncing off of that one. Is it the same for a traffic stop as well? So if somebody who's undocumented gets stopped at a traffic checkpoint or something like that, is there any other kind of things that they should know?
I mean, not having a driver's license will create an issue if that's part of it. And as I said, we all don't have the same rights at a traffic stop. Essentially, they can search you more easily. There's something different they should do. Unfortunately, it's just a harder situation.
Yes, I had a question. I haven't been arrested yet, but because I am like a juvenile, like I'm not 18 yet, what are the rules for me? Or like, can they even take me to jail? Can I even be detained?
You do have access to a juvenile court system for many crimes. However, there's certain crimes like Measure 11 crimes where you can be charged as an adult, and you'll be put through the same system. Juveniles are often either taken to a juvenile facility or released to their parents. So the post-arrest stuff might be different, but you can still face the same charges or the juvenile equivalent. You can always contact the National Lawyers Guild for legal help via nlg.org.
We can't breathe! We can't breathe! We can't breathe! We can't breathe! We can't breathe!
My arrest, the police chief and the DA's office, they made it in conjunction, and they decided way earlier that day. They sent out some sort of like public safety announcement to where they didn't have to read me my Miranda rights. They didn't have to ask me to identify myself or any of that when I was arrested. And so there's loopholes in my arrest was very unique because I was targeted. It's not, and I was also one out of 2 people arrested. The other person was arrested for assault on a cop, so they weren't even going to be arrested in the first place. But no shame, no shame. I'm trying to, it's hard to just jump into, but I mean, we had a lot of experiences in SLO where I would try and talk to our protest crowds and our other organizers and our activists, trying to educate them on, oh, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And we set out we had a bunch of people print pamphlets saying like, okay, this is stay within your area because you don't want to get arrested. But I mean, it's so difficult when it's like the people who serve the law are the ones breaking the law. Exactly. So it's like, and also a few months ago, actually, because I'm still in the process of being criminalized, I'm still going to court. I got a search warrant in the mail where it like they sent it. I don't even know how they got my address. But they had sent it to me and they requested like a night search and all of this crazy behavior, but I had already fled my old home in San Luis Obispo, so there was nowhere for them to perform that at. But I don't know, just the police have access to everything, whether you want them to or not, whether it's iMessage, email, Instagram, any of that. So just, I mean, my advice is to use Signal always. Like I ended up having to get new phones over the course of the last 8 or 9 months, almost 10 months, because my phones were tapped and they were bugged, and it was actually an investigator who had to tell me. But I don't know, just whatever you're doing, just make sure you have a plan and be careful with it because it can get real tricky. It's actually when I got arrested, I wasn't resisting at all, and it was actually 6 cops like pulling me across the street, and one of them was whispering in my ear, stop resisting, and I'm like, I'm walking with y'all. So I started screaming like, I'm not resisting, just so that could be on record. Because one of my initial charges, they changed my charges 3 different times, but one of the initial ones was resisting arrest. And they threw that out after they realized, but.
Yeah, I mean, this topic is huge, especially me being a Black man in Portland. It's definitely been something I've like always thought about, but I didn't know how to like even go about it because like you learn your rights, but then like you try to apply them and it doesn't work for you, you know? And so like growing up, I remember being 14 and hanging out with my friend and his older brother. We in a car. We all used to wear hats. Like this time, like snapbacks became really cool again. So we were all wearing them. We get in the car. He's like, hey man, no hats in the car. Talking to me and my friend. And we're like, oh, for what? I'm not trying to get pulled over. And so like just knowing that every time we get in the car, we take off our hats and become like these individuals who don't look suspicious to cops, you know? And so the fact that we have to do that is just like, it's almost degrading because the fact that we have to live with like a chip on our shoulder that we have to like always watch back and make sure we're not being followed, or we turn our signal on 100 feet away so we don't get stopped just for a random reason. There's been a lot of times I've been pulled over when I was younger with my dad as well. I remember being put in handcuffs when I was 12, being patted down just for like a signal violation. And so, and the cops' excuse is that a cop had been shot by a juvenile before, like a couple weeks ago, so that way they're on edge. So we put everybody in handcuffs, and it's just like all these stories that we tell. It's like we're not dramatizing the situation; like actually happens to us every day. And I'm just one voice out of many in Portland, and so the fact that we're learning our rights, it's really good. But it's almost like a lesson that doesn't always apply to us. So it's like it's really good, but it's also like, does it really work for me, you know? And so I'm thankful for this lesson, but it's like, I wish that I could invoke my rights and know that I'm going to be respected and listened to. I remember going back to high school at Park Rose. We had a resource officer in there, and in his office, he had like a kind of a plaque, but it was like a picture, and it showed like gang hats. and it had like different kind of like symbolisms on there. Like if you were wearing these hats, like it was tied to the certain gang. And so like I took that into account. I was kind of like, that's funny because like I know people wear these hats who are not affiliated with gangs at all, you know what I mean? But like the fact that if you wear this hat now and they have like ties to a gang, you can be profiled for that reason. And so that's something that like a lot of like my Black friends don't know, you know, and it's like they wear these hats like because they like them in like the sports teams, but in their mind, like they're just, oh, I like this hat, but police is like just looking at them as like, oh, these might be gang members right here because of the hat they're wearing. And the profiling thing is huge in Portland. And so I just think that a lot of just Black people in general should know that the stuff they wear can be targeted against them.
Absolutely. Corey, did you want to share about your thoughts on Know Your Rights training? Any statements?
Yeah, I would say what Joseph said just brought something to me. Like growing up in Chicago, two of our biggest sports team colors are like red and blue, and kids in schools are wearing Bulls jerseys and Cubs hats. And it's written in the code of conduct that if you're having red or blue or gang affiliated or anything that can be perceived as that, you can be suspended, you can be expelled, or even like can be called CPD on you. And it's so like, it's just so hard to process that. And at the same time, there's no push for students or even faculty to know what's written there, to know what's in the code of conduct, the faculty code of conduct, the student code of conduct. All we're told is, here, sign this paper, bring it back the next day. And there's no push for, let's see what's inside of this that's saying, hey, you can be scolded for talking in class. And if that happens 3 times in a row, you can be suspended. You can be expelled for not even criminal behavior. And I hate to even say the word criminal. I'm actually working on getting that out of the code of conduct right now, because there's whole pages on, here, you can call CPD if somebody has a lookalike of a drug or a weapon. You can call CPD if they're disrupting class in any way. And there's no even effort to say, let's call every number on their contact sheet before calling the police. Let's contact anyone we can. Let's work this out between students or faculty before that. And I think just like being somewhere where youth are so constantly criminalized and so constantly targeted every single day, and the difference is stark as black and white. If you go 15 minutes away to the north side or to the Loop or downtown versus the south and west sides, where everyone is assumed to be gang affiliated or assumed to be a murderer just because of the clothes that they wear, which is like, it's Chicago, we all dress the same, this is the style. So I don't like, it's so interesting to me and like disheartening to see that. And so many people are starting in a deficit, not even graduating high school, or if they are graduating, they have marks on their record because they wore a red hat to school. Like, it's just crazy to think about.
So I definitely have a story, and I just want to say that I am so thankful over these past few years. I definitely did not know anything. Like, I did not know that you didn't have to consent to a search or that you can just be quiet. I know the Fifth Amendment, and I've always known the Fifth Amendment, but it just felt like something that you'd get in trouble for almost, you know? So I'm just thankful for learning over these past 4 years that you don't have to let people into your home. So when I was like 14 or 15, we heard a knock at the door of our home, and it was the Santa Rosa Police Department in California, and they were looking for my mom. So a little background is that she's a single mother, and we were really struggling because California is extremely expensive and not a place for, you know, single mothers to thrive as much as they should be able to. And so they knocked on the door and said that they had an arrest warrant for my mother, and they did not have a warrant to enter our home. So my mother went to the back of the home, and I had our grandparent living with us at the time, and he answered the door. They were trying to find her for unpaid tickets. So we were so poor for a while that we couldn't afford car insurance. And so my mom got a ticket for that. And then she got another one. And then they got so expensive because California's tickets are absurdly expensive. So she couldn't even afford her car registration. So one time, even though the person in front of us their plate was also expired. They chose to stop my mother, and we actually had our car towed away that day. She drove 4 hours round trip to her job in California traffic every day. So when they came to our home, they asked to speak to her, and she did not come to the door. And then they asked my grandparent, like, can we come into the home? I don't exactly remember what he said, but it did feel that he was hesitant to let them in the home. But they then entered the home and they were like, so where is she? So where is she? They started kind of looking around, wanted to go down our hallway. And my mom just, she got freaked out and went out into the living room, and she was just like, I'm here. And without even saying anything, she didn't even know what she was being arrested for in that moment. She was thrown onto the ground in front of myself. And she's a white woman too. And which is like, everybody, it was absurd to see my mother thrown on the floor in front of me, and she is so small. She's 5'1", and they like picked her up and threw her on the ground in front of myself and my sister, who was 12 or 13 at the time. And they arrested her and took her out, and she came home with bruises all up and down her arms, and just still barely any knowledge of why she was being arrested. And when she was there, it turned out that they had been going around to a ton of different homes for similar tickets. And when she was there at the station, a woman next to her had been arrested while she was eating cereal in the morning, and she was still in her PJs. And I will never be able to let go of that experience. And I still don't answer my front door ever to anybody. And the first time that I was pulled over, I just broke into tears, and he kept asking, why are you crying? Why are you crying? And I was just like, I am so scared of Missouri police, of St. Louis police. Of course I'm crying. And in that moment, I just wish, and I know that it's not my fault, but I wish I knew my rights. I wish I knew that they didn't have to come in without a warrant. They didn't even show us her arrest warrant. And yeah, it was just awful. And so now I, watch TV, and I'm like, they were not allowed to enter that home. They didn't have a warrant. You can't go inside their home. So now I always do my best with especially storytelling that I do and the youth engagement that I do to make sure that everybody knows that they have these rights, to not let them enter the home without showing you all of this information. And after having our Know Your Rights training earlier, I feel a lot more confident for myself, and I hope other people are as well.
So I could definitely just talk about how much I hate the police for 2 hours. I've had a lot of really terrible experiences with them. I've been beaten by them, arrested. I've seen them beat my dad up really badly when he had a seizure, and they thought he was on drugs. So they arrested him and tore our entire house apart, destroyed my mom's dresser, and had no warrant, had no reason to do it. And then when they found out he was just having a seizure and there were no drugs in the house, they just took off his handcuffs and left him there bleeding in our front lawn. So I don't like the police very much. And I think just kind of what Joseph said got me thinking about, it's really great. We all should be knowing our rights all the time and really aware of what those rights are. But in the end, the Constitution, the amendments, all of that was written by white men, specifically property owning rich white men, to protect their property and their interests. And in the end, that's just kind of why the police exist, why these systems are in place, are to protect white men and their property. So for me, it's just important to always keep pushing for abolition, because we can talk about reform, we can talk about our rights and using them to our advantage, but in the end of the day, it's a system that's designed to criminalize poverty. It's designed to criminalize Black and brown bodies. And they're going to, use whatever they can to bring you down if they think that you're acting against the interests of the state. And we've seen on August 6th, when there was the huge, Trump Chud rally downtown, and I was down there. I'm sure some of the other folks on this panel were down there, and Dimitri was down there, and there were people with loaded AR-15s. There were people with all types of guns, just openly carrying. There was tons of cops there. I saw Demetria point out people with assault rifles to the police and say, what are you going to do? Are you going to arrest them? They're on federal property with illegal assault rifles in Multnomah County. They're breaking 3 laws. And they were like, get the fuck out of here. Get out of our faces. Stop harassing us. So in the end, even like we've seen it in person where they will protect these white folks, and especially like the ones who are working in their interests, even if it's against the law, even if it is against the Constitution, because that's their end goal. And that's what those laws were designed for. So yeah, we're just kind of seeing the pendulum swing the other way right now from the summer. And, you know, we got our police budget defunded by $2 million, which is nothing. It's like chump change. It's a fraction of what we were asking for, 50 million to start with. And they defunded it by 2 and got rid of a gang task force. They got rid of, you know, SROs, but then they put a former SRO, Chuck Lavelle, as our new police chief, who, you know, was choking out high school students, Black teenage girls, when they were at Jefferson High School for speaking out in class, like you were saying, Corey. And we had our current police chief was literally like choking out Black teenagers for speaking out in class. So like, if that isn't a stark example of the criminalization of Black bodies, then I don't know what is.
I was just thinking about, like, it's so important what Joseph said about how, you know, like, we can all know our rights, but how, you know, the standards are different depending on the color of your skin. And one of the children that I painted was Jordan Edwards. And in 2017, he was at a party, and this shouldn't matter, but, you know, like, total good kid, wasn't intoxicated. It was like a normal, just like block party, like a small house party with a bunch of kids in middle school and like freshman, sophomore. And just kind of like referencing what Joseph had said, that, you know, like, you can know your rights, but even if you're following, you know, what a cop says, doing what the cop says, a couple of cops were called because of noise disturbance, and they came to break up the party. So all the kids were getting in their cars and leaving. And he got in the car with his brother and a friend, and they went to pull out, and a bunch of cars were leaving at the same time. And on the police footage, you can hear like a pop, pop, but my son's really into car clubs and stuff. And what it really sounds like is someone's car backfired, and it was like, dun, dun. And this cop comes running up and picks the one car with 3 Black kids in it. And they're leaving as they were told to leave. And he starts yelling at them. All their windows are rolled up, right? So they can't even hear him. All the windows in the cars are rolled up. He's running up from behind. He's like, stop, stop, stop. Well, he starts shooting. He shoots into the like side back passenger side of the vehicle. And he killed Jordan instantly, right? But it's so horrifying because it's just along those lines. Like, they were doing what they were supposed to do. You know what I mean? They weren't running, they weren't fleeing. They had walked out to their vehicle. There was like 7 or 8 cars at the same time leaving. They weren't speeding off. But sometimes it's just so sad that it doesn't matter if you know your rights. Sometimes, you know, if you're Black in America, it doesn't matter if you know your rights. And he just did everything he was supposed to do. And so, like, I think it's just so important for everybody just to kind of realize that, you know, 1, it just doesn't matter sometimes. And then 2, Jacinda, you know, you had the question earlier about, you know, people who are undocumented. My dad is undocumented. And, you know, I lived for a really long time always being afraid that he was going to get deported. And we lived in California too. And the apartment building that we lived in was all Hispanics. And not to make excuses, but my dad was making kind of some bad choices. You know, like, my mom had dropped me, my brother, and my sister off to live with him, and he sold stuff in the flea markets. But he was also, you know, doing some things he shouldn't have been doing. But just talking about knowing your rights, the police were obviously like watching my dad, and they had knocked on our door one night at like 11 o'clock at night and said, oh, someone called 911 from your house. We have to check on your kids. And I just remember my dad being so scared. He was like the best, he's just the most loving dad to us. And nobody comes and knocks on our door late at night. And I was probably like 14 or something, 13 or 14. So I, came out of my room, and my dad was like, "Oh, mija, go lay down, it's fine." And I remember seeing this cop at the doorway, and I was so terrified because I thought they were going to come deport him, And just that idea of like lack of knowledge and knowing our rights. My dad let them in out of fear, and they searched through our entire house. And under this assumption that someone had called 911, no one even called 911. They were just trying to search our home, right? And they came in, they were like totally armed. They searched all our house. They tried to act like asking me and my sister and brother, like, "Are you guys okay?" And my dad was beyond not just scared, but I think humiliated. But again, just like that lack of knowledge of rights, right? Like, I think sometimes though, we're quite often when people are undocumented, there's so much fear behind even testing your rights, even trying to see, if you could say anything, that you just go along with anything because you're afraid, But I just think it's really important that everyone thinks about what Joseph said, because I think that really made me just think about, Jordan Edwards and how he was killed. And that, even if you know your rights, and even if you listen to everything they're saying, or Tiana having to say, "I'm not resisting, and how you have to go that extra mile just to stay alive. And it's pretty sad.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be here and just, hearing these stories. And I think that, like, echoing what's already been like central and centered, is that like there is, from what everybody's talking about, what Barack was saying, and you said it too, Teresa, it's like this idea that most people know, most allies, most people under the white power construct, people that are walking in white skin, understand this stuff but don't understand it. And I think that that is so clear, and that is a huge separation in society right now. And like, there's this wild study that only like 15% of Americans can like even note the year the Constitution was written. And which means that like, if people don't know the year it was written, they don't know what it was founded on, and the principles of usurpation and colonization and supremacy that it was founded on. And I think my biggest thing, and as you talked about being an ally, is just, continuing to show up and not to be afraid to examine that, and look at, regardless of, growing up in like the household I grew up in, within a Jewish household with Jewish lineage and roots, I'm never going to be picked out of a crowd. I'm never going to be, I'm never going to go into a car and have to be, fear, or go into an educational system, or be in these events and everything, these stories that are being shared. So I think ultimately, just as an artist and musician, and within that context, it's like, and for any, maybe white people that are watching, it's like, if there's not that step to identify that, regardless of what you think about, being white or whatever it is, that it's, inherently I am, and whatever that is means part of that systemic racism that exists, until everything that is done possible to dismantle that. And I think that that is a big one that a lot of leadership's missing, whether that's all the way up the echelon to the president and the ecosystem that exists, to local governance. And I think that, that's the common ethos, and that's from what I'm finding with, especially with, and a lot of white people in this community here. I'm very grateful for the communities that I do exist in, and happy to be here as well. So it's an interesting one to have to, to speak on and to navigate. And I think it just ties into everything, being an artist and musician, of looking at what lies within my roots and with what exists there, and also recognizing where I am at now in this society and what this society represents, regardless of what my personal story is. And being able to clearly root in that and show up as an ally in any way, shape, or possible, in order to figure out how to dismantle these systems in this lifetime. I think that is hopefully a devotion that is rooted in art and music, but can also just be rooted into connecting in community, and making sure that I'm also very aware of everything that everybody's talking about in terms of community rights, the history of this country, the history of law, political law, the history of, everything, even what's going on with the police contracts in Portland, and just being really making sure to be listening and to be checking in constantly. And yeah, also being very open to critique and to be able to be called out and to be able to be, showing up in the proper ways.
The ACLU in St. Louis was handing out like similar Know Your Rights pamphlets that Don't Shoot was. And in addition to that, providing the chain door locks that people have to attach that to their doors so they don't, open it up too hard where cops can enter them forcefully. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work that we should be doing. And I think that kind of bag system would be really, really helpful for all Oregonians here. And I think it's also really important for us to know our rights when it comes to delivering testimony or writing your legislators. St. Louis and Missouri in general is constantly working to ban abortion. And Senator Roy Blunt is extremely pro-life. And we went to his office with like thousands of letters to fight for Title X rights, and they denied us completely. The federal marshals said, absolutely not, you can't even come in here. And so my mom and I went up with the organizer of the day, and we started talking to him, and we started asking him, hey, can we bring in one box? And he was like, okay, fine, but you guys have to get searched and you need to give us your IDs. And then we just kept pushing and pushing because we know our rights. We have a right to speak to our legislator. And mind you, Senator Blunt has never been to his office in St. Louis, never been to his office. And this is also somebody that spoke at our inauguration. And I was just so upset to see that he was there. But we kept pushing and we kept pushing to the point where the marshal was like, okay, awesome. Like, go ahead, go through. We're putting it through the scanners. So it's really important us to know our rights and that we can have meetings with these folks. We can deliver these messages and don't take shit from anyone because you know your rights, you know what you're entitled to, and keep calling them out. Roy Blunt sucks. And a lot of, it's just really important that we know our rights when we're being faced by the cops and also taking action to expand our rights and take down these oppressive systems.
I think today went really good. I'm very excited about all the information that was shared and just the power of knowledge and sharing and having these discussions. When I first started the Know Your Rights training here, and we would go to different Boys and Girls Clubs or different schools, I had been contacted by some of our pastors in our community because they advised me that the information that we were sharing with the kids was going to get them killed. They were like, you're going to get these kids killed out here because they're supposed to listen to the police when the police want to talk to them. You can't tell them that they can't, let them search them. They need to know that that's what they got to do because that's what we teach them. And I was like, well, you're teaching them not to be Americans, not to take full residency in this country because they have a right to be fully entitled to their safety and their protection under how they feel that should be, and so again, it's important to assert and to have these conversations because we have to break the myths. We have to stop those myths and we have to really frame it up so that we're all on the same page. And like I said, when I was doing it, it wasn't to kind of stop them from hurting us because I didn't really think that they would stop hurting us. But I knew that it would empower families that sought justice. I knew that just the simple fact that someone can assert their rights, and if they're streaming it at the time using mobile justice apps or using some type of device to document it, that on the record that statement could actually lead us to an investigation. And the thing about even the fact that we have the right to remain silent and that the police have to invoke that information to us, it's because somebody fought back. The Miranda rights are named after a lawsuit, someone who actually said, you know what, I'm going to fight this because I feel like I was unjustly treated. And now they have to give Miranda rights all over the country during arrest. And a lot of times they don't believe that you know your rights. When I got arrested and I told them they didn't have consent to search and different things like that, they were like, oh yeah, you probably think you know your rights. And I was like, what? And I had literally just done a know your rights training with ACLU attorneys and volunteers. So it was just kind of odd that they did not respect that. And I was acquitted. So
knowing your rights doesn't always mean you'll be respected by the police either. Honestly, it just means they're going to be more aggravated with you. So I always say be prepared for that. That's why I literally just don't even engage with police, because it's going to be a battle.
And I was going to say on the way out, if everybody just wants to go ahead and remind people how to either Cash App or find their goods and services programs support online, I'll just give you a chance to share that on our way out. We got 4 good minutes. So thank you again. My name is Teresa Rayford, and you can find out information about us on don'tshootpdx.org.
Yep, this is day 3. We got day 1 is still being subtitled, and that'll be available for upload soon. Do the chat.
What am I doing here? Write them letters.
Yeah,
you can say that, Jacinda.
Barack says never call the cops. Just get to know your neighbors. Form action committees. I agree with that. Like, advocate for your neighbors. Yesterday we talked about advocating for yourselves a lot. Anyone, if you know your rights and you know that someone, one of your neighbors, an elderly neighbor, someone that might be having trouble interpreting this situation, reach out,
share information.
Share information, yeah.
Joseph, you had something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know times are rough right now for a lot of people, but if you can't afford it, I would say equip either your house or your car with cameras or some kind of audio device, just so that you have like your own recordings of the situations that happen. Because like oftentimes if you see it, like clips can be altered and look differently depending on who's recording them. So just like know your space and record them.
Absolutely. I recommend Blink.
Very easy. Turn off your Face ID when you go out on the streets and whatnot, especially when you go out to protests, because they will try to unlock your phone. It happened to my friend. And then also making your password longer than 4 numbers. And then in addition, making sure that your Signal chat or your messaging app are completely locked down. The notifications are turned off, and because they will try to read them.
Oh, also a note on what Ian was saying earlier. Make sure you have a friend recording you. I can't express enough. We've been almost in a year into this legal battle with the city of Portland, and a really instrumental change in our lawsuit was the footage, the reconstruction of clips from social media of the police attacking folks, but then combined with drone aerial footage of the map of downtown. And it actually pinpointed where things were happening. It showed for the first time in a courtroom how police kettle people, and they tell you to evacuate now, yet they know that you have nowhere to go and they're poisoning you. So like this has been played in the courtrooms, people's footage from the internet. They were using hashtags. They sent it to us on social media and we brought it to the courtroom. So don't forget to film
the police.
Yeah, film the police.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. When we would teach Know Your Rights training from 2014 on forward, we would always talk about filming the police and coming there and getting the streams going on. And it was never, I noticed this year, people were like streaming and taking pictures of the protests like it was a press conference. Not you, Joseph, but it was people like literally outing people, and it's not safe. But when we would have people streaming or documenting, it was so that we could use that footage to protect our rights to protest. And so you have all these people that are literally capturing the police. They're getting their badges, they're getting their gear. And we were able to kind of file complaints against the type of gear they used, and if they had flags, and if they wore, things that were not a part of their city employee uniforms, stuff like that. And so continue to be consistent, know your rights, promote it. Thank y'all all for being here.
Street, our street. 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 Our street. Our street. Our street. Our streets! Our streets!
You guys have